Welcome to Asian Tribune's Monday Geopolitical Analysis, Power and Global Politics. This is where we examine the forces of power, influence and strategy that shape today's global landscape. If you value clear, independent analysis, we invite you to subscribe to the Asian Tribune channel and stay connected with our weekly discussions. Thank you for joining us. Let's begin.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We often hear people talk about global change or shifting tides.
It's a bit of a cliche at this point.
It is, right?
Right.
And usually it's just a metaphor for this slow, grinding evolution of history, the kind of thing you only notice when you, look at a map from 10 years ago.
And realize the borders have moved a few inches.
Exactly. But then every once in a while, you get a single week where the tectonic plates of geopolitics shift so visibly all at once that you can actually feel the ground moving.
It's those rare moments where history accelerates, where it feels like decades of development happen in a matter of days.
And today, we are looking at exactly one of those weeks. We are diving into a comprehensive geopolitical analysis from Asian Tribune News, covering the critical window of January 18th to the 25th, 2025.
And looking at these sources, it really does feel like we're seeing a different world map than the one we had just a few years ago.
It really does.
What's fascinating about this particular analysis is that it doesn't just look at these events as isolated fires to be put out. It connects them. It argues we're witnessing a great realignment.
A realignment? That's a heavy term. Usually we just hear about conflicts or crises.
It is heavy, but I think it's accurate. The central argument here is that we are moving away from a system of singular dominance, mostly U.S. dominance, toward a messy, complex system of balance and negotiation.
And Asia's role in that is changing.
Fundamentally, Asia isn't just watching this happen anymore. Asia is becoming a central actor, the stage where this new drama plays out.
So our mission today is to unpack 5 distinct events from this one specific week. We're going to bounce from the diplomatic backrooms of the Middle East to the chaotic waters of the Red Sea.
Over to the freezing front lines of Ukraine, across to the high-tension Taiwan Strait.
And finally up to the mountains of Davos.
A world tour of tension, essentially. But more than that, it's a tour of how the rules of the game are changing.
I like that. Let's start with the Middle East. Specifically, this framework that emerged between January 17th and 19th. The headlines were buzzing about something called the Board of Peace. Now, I have to be honest, when I first saw that in the source material, my cynicism alarm went off. Board of Peace sounds like a committee you'd join at a local community center.
It's certainly a branding choice, isn't it?
Yeah.
But if we look past the name, the substance is incredibly significant.
Okay.
This was a formal announcement about a new political coordination mechanism for post-war Gaza, and the source notes a crucial detail. It was former U.S. President Donald Trump, speaking in Washington, who confirmed the structure.
Right, and confirming it in Washington sends a very specific message. But what exactly is this board supposed to do? Is it a government?
The analysis describes it as a diplomatic structure intended to guide 3 main pillars: reconstruction, security administration, and humanitarian access. But the subtext here is what's really interesting. It's a proxy for post-war governance.
Okay, so thinking about the day after, the part that usually gets messy.
Exactly. The strategy here is very specific.
Yeah.
The U.S. is trying to thread a geopolitical needle. They want to avoid direct military involvement. No
boots on the ground.
Right. That's a hard line for them. But they also want to prevent 2 other outcomes. They don't want militant groups taking control again, and they're trying to avoid a full, permanent Israeli military reoccupation.
So it's an attempt to create a third option, a managed transition.
Precisely, it's option C.
Yeah.
But here's where we have to ask.
Yeah.
So what? Why does this matter for the rest of the world, specifically for Asia and the global south?
Right. Why should a listener in Tokyo or New Delhi care about a board of peace designed in Washington?
Well, the source points out that this reinforces the U.S. as the primary architect in the Middle East. Even if they aren't putting boots on the ground, they are drawing the blueprints.
And that creates friction.
A lot of it. The analysis highlights that China, Russia, and several Muslim-majority nations are deeply skeptical of any U.S.-led framework. They see this board of peace, and they don't necessarily see peace.
They see American influence.
They see a Western power deciding the future of a Middle Eastern territory, maybe without sufficient consultation with the neighbors.
Which creates a divide, right? If you're a country in the global south, do you sign on to the U.S. plan? Do you fund it? Or do you look for alternatives?
And on a practical level, this affects energy stability. Asian economies are heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil and gas. If this board of peace fails, or if it triggers a backlash, those shipping routes and energy supplies are at risk.
Speaking of shipping routes, while politicians in Washington were planning boards of peace, the actual waters nearby were becoming an absolute chaos zone. This brings us to our second topic, the Red Sea crisis.
This is the part of the report that I found genuinely alarming. We are talking about the Bab el-Mandeb Strait,
The Gate of Tears.
a poetic name for a place that handles nearly 12% of global trade. The report covers the continued attacks on commercial vessels right through that third week of January.
And here's the irony that stuck out to me. There was a U.S.-led naval coalition there. They were increasing patrols. They were supposed to be the sheriff in town.
And yet,
The disruptions didn't stop. They intensified.
that is the key signal. We have operated for decades under the assumption that the U.S. Navy guarantees safe passage in international waters. That's been the bedrock of global trade since 1945.
And this week in January showed us what?
That global trade security is no longer guaranteed.
That is a terrifying thought if you are a logistics manager in Tokyo or Seoul. You're looking at your spreadsheets and realizing the math just doesn't work anymore.
It's a nightmare. The source explicitly mentions that major Asian economies, China, India, Japan, South Korea, faced immediate fallout. We aren't just talking about abstract tension, we're talking about real delays.
Insurance hikes, fuel price volatility.
Exactly, because if you can't go through the Red Sea, you have to go all the way around Africa. That adds days, weeks, and massive costs.
And this forces these Asian nations to ask some very uncomfortable strategic questions, doesn't it?
It does. The report lists them. Can they rely on Western naval protection anymore? Clearly, the umbrella is leaking.
So if the umbrella leaks, do you buy your own umbrella?
That's the question. Is it time for regional maritime security alliances? Does Japan need to work with India to secure their own ships? How vulnerable are their supply chains, really?
It's not just about shipping containers anymore, it's national security.
Exactly. The conflict in the Middle East is producing economic shockwaves that hit factories in Shenzhen and Mumbai.
It really redefines what security means. You can be safe at home, your borders can be secure, but if your oil tanker is on fire in the Red Sea, your economy is in real trouble.
Precisely. It exposes the fragility of the just-in-time world we built. We optimized for efficiency, assuming the seas would always be safe.
And now we're realizing we might have to optimize for safety, which is much, much more expensive.
A different calculation entirely.
Okay, let's move north. We've looked at the Middle East heat. Now let's look at the European freeze. Topic 3. Ukraine.
This is a pivotal week for Europe. Around January 20th, 2025, the analysis notes a distinct shift in tone.
The word they used was fatigue.
Yes, Western fatigue. Now, officially, NATO reaffirmed its commitment to Kyiv. If you looked at the press releases, everything was solid.
But behind the scenes...
The deep dive source says that behind the scenes, the cracks were showing.
It's the domestic pressures, right. European leaders were dealing with their own economic issues, former protests, political divisions. It's hard to keep writing checks when your own voters are unhappy.
Exactly. There was a divergence emerging between the US and Europe on funding timelines and escalation risks. The whole Western unity narrative was fraying.
And what's fascinating is how Moscow responded.
They didn't just push on the battlefield, they capitalized on this fatigue diplomatically.
They pivoted.
They pivoted to Asia. Moscow intensified its diplomatic messaging toward the East, portraying Russia not as a pariah, but as a counterbalance to the West.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Or at least the counterbalance to the guy bossing you around is your partner.
In a way, yes. And for Asian observers, countries in South and Southeast Asia, this changes how they view the war. It's no longer just a regional conflict in Europe.
So what is it?
The expert analysis calls it a test of global power endurance.
Who can hold their breath longer? The Western treasuries or the Russian war machine?
Essentially. And for those countries in the middle, say India, Indonesia, Vietnam, this solidifies the need to walk a strategic tightrope.
Let's unpack that tightrope. What does that actually look like for a country like Vietnam or India?
Well, you can't afford to cut ties with the West. That's where your technology, investment, and finance come from. You need the American market. But you also see Russia as a necessary partner for energy, defense, or just as leverage to keep the Americans from getting too bossy. So you don't align. You balance.
You play both sides.
The report says multipolarity is now operational, not theoretical.
That's a great line. It's not just a theory in a police-style textbook anymore. It's how you actually have to run your foreign policy day to day.
It is the new reality. You might buy your fighter jets from one block and your semiconductors from another. It's a purely transactional world, and that makes everything more complicated.
Which sounds exhausting. But speaking of tightropes and delicate balances, let's go to perhaps the most fragile place on the map, the Taiwan Strait.
This is our fourth topic, and it offers a really interesting contrast to Ukraine.
How so?
In Ukraine, we have active conflict. In the Taiwan Strait during this week in January, we had high drama, large-scale military drills by China near Taiwan.
Right, and at the same time, the U.S. was doing heavy diplomatic and naval signaling.
It looked like the brink of war. If you were just watching the footage of jets and carriers, you'd think the fuse was lit.
But, and this is the twist, the source points out that despite all the noise, no red lines were crossed.
That is the critical observation. This wasn't an invasion attempt. It was what analysts call deterrence communication.
Deterrence communication. That sounds like a polite way of saying threatening each other with very big guns.
Well, it is, but it's a language. Beijing was sending a message to Washington. Remember, Taiwan is a core interest. Do not push us.
And Washington was sending a message back to its allies. We are here. We aren't abandoning the region.
Exactly. It's a calibration.
So it's a performance, a very expensive, dangerous performance.
It is, but Washington wants to reassure allies without starting World War III. And Beijing wants to assert sovereignty without triggering a sanctions war that would crush its economy.
So both sides are communicating their limits. Peace is maintained. By what?
Calculation?
By calculation. The report describes the future for Asia as being defined by this tension. Economic interdependence versus strategic rivalry. We need each other to get rich, but we don't trust each other to stay safe.
That's it. Peace isn't maintained by trust. It's maintained because both sides have done the math and realized that war is just too expensive. But that's a fragile peace.
It's like two people holding a priceless vase. If either one lets go or pushes too hard, it shatters. And the math can change very quickly.
And that fragility, that realization that the math is the only thing saving us, is exactly what leads us to our final stop, Davos, Switzerland.
The World Economic Forum, the place where the global elite meet to ski and save the world.
Usually, yes.
Yeah.
It's usually the temple of optimism and global integration. But the mood in January 2025 was different.
The source calls it a sobering consensus, and they delivered a verdict that I think a lot of people have felt coming, but hearing it said out loud is different.
What was it?
The era of globalization as we knew it is over.
That is the headline. For 30 years, the logic was efficiency. Make it wherever it's cheapest, ship it wherever it's needed, just-in-time supply chains, a borderless world.
And Davos 2025 said, that's done.
It's done.
So what are they focusing on instead? If efficiency is out, what's in?
Security, resilience. The buzzwords changed completely. Instead of global integration, they were talking about regional trade blocks,
Strategic autonomy.
AI governance, energy security.
Strategic autonomy. That sounds like a fancy way of saying I'm going to do it myself.
That's exactly what it is. It's expensive. It means building factories in your own country or in friendly countries, even if it costs more. It means ensuring you control your own energy so you aren't reliant on a pipeline from a country that might invade its neighbor.
It's almost like the world is breaking up into neighborhoods.
That's a good way to put it. Or fortresses.
Mm.
And for Asia, the directive from Davos was very clear. Growth now depends on resilience, not just expansion.
Meaning, it's not just about how fast you can grow, but how hard it is to knock you down.
Precisely. The advice to emerging economies was specific. Diversify your supply chains so you aren't dependent on one source. Reduce your debt so you aren't vulnerable to interest rate shocks.
Strengthen regional cooperation. Build your own lifeboat, basically.
Or at least make sure your ship has watertight compartments. And this shift connects everything we've talked about. The reason you need resilience is because of the Red Sea crisis disrupting trade. The reason you need regional cooperation is because of the Board of Peace politics and the friction with U.S. designs. The reason you need strategic autonomy is because of the Ukraine fatigue showing that external help doesn't last forever.
It all connects. It's one big, messy, interconnected system.
It does. And it signals that Asia's role is evolving. It's no longer just the factory of the world. It has to be both the engine and the stabilizer of the global economy.
So let's try to pull this all together. We started with a Board of Peace in Washington and ended with the death of globalization in Switzerland. What does this all mean for someone listening right now?
If we synthesize these 5 stories, the overarching theme is the transition from dominance to balance.
The U.S. isn't the only player calling the shots.
No, we are moving from a world of certainty, where you knew the rules and who enforced them, to a world of negotiation. Everything is up for discussion. Security is negotiated, trade routes are negotiated.
And conflicts are interconnected. A drone in the Red Sea affects the price of gas in Seoul, which affects the political stability of a government in Europe.
Precisely. And in this new world, Asia is the central stage. It's where the economic gravity is, but it's also where the strategic tension is highest.
It sounds exhausting, honestly, living in a world of constant negotiation.
It requires more attention. It requires being well-informed in a way that wasn't necessary 10 years ago. You can't just look at the stock market ticker. You have to look at the naval charts.
You have to understand the political mood in multiple capitals, not just one.
Right.
That brings us to a final thought I want to leave our listeners with. We've talked about how trade routes can be closed. We've heard that globalization is dead. So here's the question. If the era of the seamless, borderless world is truly over, are we entering an era where you live matters more than what you know?
That is a profound question. Geography is destiny again.
It certainly feels that way. If you're in a safe regional bloc, you're fine. If you're on the wrong side of the board of peace, maybe not.
And that is something every individual and every business needs to reckon with. Your location, your neighbors, your alliances.
Yeah.
They are now your most critical assets.
Well, on that cheery note, look, the world is shifting, and our goal here is to help you keep your balance while the ground moves. Thank you for diving deep with us into the great realignment of January 2025.
It's always a pleasure to connect the dots.
Stay curious, stay safe, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.